Good evening, everybody. I want to be mindful of everybody's time this evening. Thank you for joining us to talk about solar, and I'll go through a quick overview of what we're gonna do tonight, but really appreciate you all coming out to be here. I'm Jenny Roush. I'm the Director of Planning for the city, and I've been with the city for almost 20 years, which is time flies when you're having fun. So really appreciate you being here. Tammy Noble, she's going to present the bulk of our presentation tonight. She's a senior planner. She's been with the city also for 15 years. Yeah, so we've been here a long time and had the opportunity to work with many of you, lots of familiar faces here. So we have a virtual component as well. So people are watching us live streaming and they'll be able to provide us with some questions or comments along the way virtually, and Ash will be able to facilitate that as well. So, and then here's the online instructions for those that are watching virtually, how to submit your comments, and then we'll be able to work through those as we go. So tonight we're going to do a staff presentation, which is going to talk about what our existing regulations are, some of the research that we've done, where we are with a draft code amendment that's been initially introduced to City Council, and their request was to have the opportunity to hear additional comment before there's a final public hearing on that, to make sure that we're aligning with what the community wants to see. And then we'll have an opportunity for question and answers of anyone in this audience as well. And then we have a little fun interactive survey that you can take on your phone. And then so it's a website and a code that's up there, but it'll be later as well throughout the presentation. But just to get an idea of everybody in the room. And then if there's people are interested in providing comments about, some of their answers that they provided, to give us a little better sense of the context of that, we'd love to hear that. And then we'll go through next steps. And before I get too far down the road, we do have two council members here. Councilmember Amherst Grooms and Vice Mayor DeRosa are here as well to hear your comments and hear the discussion tonight. So with that, we'll sort of go over, I was going to provide a quick overview of sort of how we got here. So a lot of interest in solar has arisen within the past year, largely related to tax credits and financial incentives from a federal government level. So there's been a lot of interest, particularly on the residential side. So that has sort of piqued everyone's interest and wanting to look at how that fits then with our community character. So city council goal to be the most sustainable. How are we looking at that in light of and taking into account our community aesthetics and understanding how we maintain that as well? So how do we balance those two pieces, knowing that we really want to be sustainable and ensuring the opportunity for residents and commercial property owners to do that? So weighing how we're doing that in a practical standpoint. So looking at aesthetics, character, community values, environmental stewardship, all those factors coming into play with this conversation. And the goal really to be establishing regulations that best represent public input, council's goals and their desires. And so that's what's led us to where we are with our draft amendment, which Tammy will go over where we are with that here in a minute. So again, we just wanted to provide some examples. These are not in Dublin, but just giving a sense of what, various solar installations can look like from a residential standpoint. So a lot of our discussion has been around, what does this look like? Where is it placed on your roof? Is it permitted to the front? Is it only to the side or the rear? Does it have to be a shingle? Can it be a panel? So lots of factors were taken into consideration as we developed this amendment, wanting to understand, what the best options were for residents to have this opportunity, but also then how does that align with the aesthetics and the character of the city of Dublin? And then we have similar examples for commercial. The discussion related to commercial also includes, as you'll see in here, covered parking and using solar over existing parking areas as an opportunity, as well as then obviously on the roofs of buildings. And then in some instances, architecturally integrated into the building. So there's solar that you may not even know is solar because it's solar windows or some other material. So how do we account for those as well? And knowing that technology is changing, right? So the technology of today is going to be different in 5 years and 10 years. So this isn't going to be the last conversation that we have about this topic. So it's how do we find a place to start? And then ultimately we're going to be looking at this over time just to figure out what's working, what's not working. How do we best address this as we move forward? So So our current regulations, really looking at renewable energy, is considered an accessory structure, which is currently limited to the side and rear of your property, including that for single family. So if you wanted to put solar on your house, you can only do it on the side or rear of your property, is what the current code, as it exists today, would permit. Same for commercial properties as well. There are also a number of developments which are in planned unit developments, which sometimes have more restrictions. So there may be some subdivisions or commercial development that do not permit this at all in any capacity. So there's that piece to factor into this as well. We do have several commercial related districts that already have permissions for solar, and that includes West Innovation, which is obviously out on the west side of the city. Bridge Street District has allowances for that. Historic Dublin addresses that within the regulations for that. And then our MUR code, or our mixed use residential, which is largely a commercial Blazer, France Road metro area zoning district. And building permits are required for that. So that's the city component and what the city regulates. Then there's also the neighborhood restrictions. So if you're in an HOA, then you may have deed restrictions that address this, and those are enforced and regulated by the neighborhood. So those are not regulated by the city. So you sort of have to look at both the pieces and figure out how they fit together. And then there's also been something at the Senate level. There was a bill passed in September of this past year that's providing some guidance about how HOAs can regulate that. That's working its way through the system and being tested in terms of what that looks like from a neighborhood standpoint and how far they can regulate that or prohibit that outright. So that's still in its sort of infant stages, if you will, but that's also a factor as well in terms of helping neighborhoods understand how they can regulate this if they choose to. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy, and she's going to talk through the research we've done to get here. And then, like I said, the draft amendment. And then we have an online survey that's been open since December. So she has some preliminary results of that to share with everyone so you can see where your fellow residents are, where they're commenting and what their thoughts are. And you're welcome to take that survey too. We have a link at the end. And we have a landing page on our website that also has that as well. So encourage you to take that as well. So I'll turn it over to Tammy.
So we appreciate you being here. Can everyone hear me? I have a very low voice. I apologize. I try to keep it elevated and it never works. So if at any point in time you can't hear me, you raise your hand and I will do my best. So I am Tammy Noble. I am managing the project for the City of Dublin. We've been working on this for over a year. One of the things we want to highlight is the efforts that we've done specifically to educate our community about our regulations, and specifically any regulations that might supersede or be in tandem to our zoning regulations, so everyone knows exactly what they might be dealing with if considering solar energy, and more importantly, how we can help you. This meeting has been specifically compiled to allow residents to make comments. We've had a myriad of public hearings, but we wanted a specific hearing where we could get the public together, talk about what the issues are, talk about what your viewpoints are, and allow those comments to be forwarded to City Council before any type of final recommendations can be made. So we appreciate you being here, and hopefully we can work together to come up with regulations that meets everyone's needs. So what Jenny said was, again, when I first started this, I knew about this much about solar, so I had to educate myself, and it was a really great experience. I'm truly thankful for the energy companies that have worked with me to identify how solar energy works, what innovations are in the forefront, what's going to happen in the future, how we can best regulate to allow people within this climate and this community to do solar energy, and what any type of provisions we do, how that would impact your decision-making capabilities. So we've really tried to reach out. I've worked with installation companies, we've worked with energy providers, we worked for advocacy groups, we've worked for local planning agencies, just again, to educate ourselves on the topic. In terms of a specific entity that we're working with currently, there's a group called SoulSmart. This is a national organization that we're working with that helps local communities adopt regulations that are user-friendly and meet the needs of the community. And they help us not only adopt regulations that meet our needs, but they help us educate not only our public, but our boards and commissions, our staff. And we've made a commitment to work with SoulSmart to enroll in their program and to allow them to help us as we go through this process. We've drafted a letter of commitment with this organization, and we're working with them in tandem currently. We've also worked to review all permits associated with solar energy, just to get an idea of how many property owners have engaged in the installation of solar energy. And we've also looked at all of our plan districts, as Jenny kind of alluded to. Plan districts usually have regulations that can be very specific, and they can supersede what we would adopt as zoning regulations. So we wanted to know what those communities, what their development text said, so we can then allow their community, their specific community, to understand what regulations might be in place that could impact their decision to install solar energy. So we've made very concerted efforts to educate ourselves on what our challenges or our I guess, decision-making practices would be, so we can then educate the public. And finally, what we would do with any type of efforts, we talk to local communities within the Central Ohio region, our partners in many of the suburban communities, as well as some in communities across the country, to talk about what their regulations are. So specifically, and I thought about this when I put this this here. We have worked with any company that we have encountered that install solar energy. These are just a few, but we've extended the opportunity to talk to them about how they install solar energy, what implications our regulations might have with the installation of solar, and what type of technology advancements we can expect. So again, just trying to educate ourselves. We've also dealt with some planning agencies in the region to understand what kind of regulations they're introducing to their communities, and that includes Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Across the board, we found that either communities are not regulating solar energy, or they are regulating to a rather restrictive degree. So it's almost a all or nothing type of regulation. So we just wanted to know, where would we fit into the region in terms of regulations? And then again, there's two advocacy groups that we've worked with. SoulSmart, I already mentioned. There's also a group called Solar United Neighbors, which the Senate bill that Jenny had mentioned, Senate Bill 61, they were the I guess, authors of the bill, and we've worked with them to understand what that Senate bill would mean to the public and what we can see in the future for any type of future legislation. So I won't go into, I feel like I've captured this to some degree, but SoulSmart is going to help us. They're going to help us understand what we can do for the community and how we can best make our regulations not only meet the needs of our community, but to be very transparent to the community. It's very important to them that people understand the process. Whatever your process is, that people understand the process. They also have a designation program. Communities enroll in their program, and as you advance in your transparency, you incrementally move up through the tiers. You start out as a bronze and you work your way from silver to gold. So it's a benchmarking opportunity for the city of Dublin to then identify how we measure with other communities. So it gives us opportunities to improve as we move forward. So again, we wanted to know we had gotten an influx of requests for solar energy. So we wanted to see how prevalent is this need, and where are we in terms of installation in the city of Dublin. And this, I will say these numbers are as of the fall. We found that we have 74 building permits that does require a building permit. We have 74 building permits that have been applied for through the city of Dublin, primarily almost exclusively the residential. So we know that that's the strong need that we're looking at. And almost over half have been since 2021. And if you remember what Jenny was talking about, there's financial incentives for the installation of solar. So we feel like that has obviously aided in the increase of permits, and is probably why many of you are sitting here tonight. So in terms of permitting history, again, we also wanted to know what information or restrictions are in planned districts, because again, that can be above what we're talking about. So we're going to tell you what most residential districts would require, at least what we're proposing for residential districts to require. Planned districts have very specific regulations, and the city of Dublin has many planned districts. So we actually researched every planned unit development, specifically residential and commercial developments, and we found 17 districts that have requirements for building materials, including roofing materials, and those regulations could impact decision-making processes for people within those communities. And there's a few that we've listed. As Jenny mentioned, there's also deed restrictions. Deed restrictions are not anything that the city of Dublin or a governmental entity enforces, but they are restrictions that are applied to for residential property owners, and they are enforceable. So we wanted to make concerted efforts to allow people to understand what those deed restrictions are, again, because that's another part of the review process. And finally, Senate Bill 61, we made considerable efforts to educate the public about Senate Bill 61, including information to all the HOAs to let them know what that meant, because it basically talked about what their authority-making processes are and are not through their local communities. So in the fall, we actually reached out to all of the HOAs, which was our communications team. They've done an excellent job, but we reached out to all the HOAs, and we had provided information about the Senate bill, and specifically what those regulations meant to individual communities. We also asked them to report back to us number one, what the restrictions are for their local communities, and what they're hearing from their constituents. Are they getting interest about solar energy? Is there installation within their communities, and exactly what does that mean for them? 27 communities responded back to us. Half of them said they were not aware of any type of restrictions for solar energy. And the remaining 50% said that they would like for the city to consider some sort of regulatory restrictions for solar energy. So in all of this information, there are mixed views on solar energy. So benchmarking, I mentioned this before. Again, I believe there was 17 communities that we looked at. These are just a few: Bexley, Burlington, Gahanna, just to see what type of regulations that they have in place currently. Most of the communities either don't have any type of restrictions, or they have very similar restrictions to what we're talking about tonight. Oh, thanks, Jen. Did I get everything on that last line? Thanks. Oh, this is very important. So again, we've educated ourselves. We're drafting language that would identify solar energy and what those restrictions would mean to the public. But the very, very important thing that we want to say is a code amendment doesn't just happen and exist for nth degree. We want this to be an ongoing process, specifically as technology evolves. We're going to need to take that into consideration. And so this is going to be a continual effort with our department to continue to update our regulations. So in terms of, we're trying to capture the magnitude of involvement that this process has had. And again, we've been doing this for a little over a year. The various boards and commissions have heard the subject. Probably the most distinguished meeting that we had was a joint work session in August that involved not only City Council, but all of our boards and commissions. All of our boards and commissions have different authorities and different reasons for dealing with solar energy. So we wanted to get all of them in one room to talk about what their needs are, what they're hearing, what they're seeing, and what their thoughts are. So that occurred in August. The Board of Zoning Appeals is a board I personally oversee. We have several applications that are before the Board of Zoning Appeals for applications that currently don't meet our regulations. So there are people that are coming out and saying, we want something different. So we are hearing those requests. The Planning and Zoning Commission specifically reviews proposed draft language, and they've done so on multiple occasions, I believe 4, the last of which was in October when they adopted language that's currently before the City Council. I had talked about, the City of Dublin does an annual meeting with all of the homeowners associations, specifically about topics that would be of interest to them. Solar energy was a topic that we produced at the last meeting, and Jenny was kind enough to present them. And then based on all of those meetings, we drafted code language that we believe captures the sentiment of the City of Dublin. We presented that to City Council. It's a first reading, so I don't want to get too technical, but there's 2 readings. The first reading was in November. The second is yet to occur, and that's why we're here. We want to get comments from the public before any type of final recommendations are approved. In general, in all of those meeting processes, there's support for solar energy. We do have sustainable practices with the City of Dublin, and we think that this is in line with those practices. With any type of land use decision, there's a balance of needs. There's a private property owner decision-making processes, and there's a community aesthetics that is also important. So balancing those needs is sometimes tricky, to be honest with you, and that's why we're here. But City Council and all of the boards and commissions made it perfectly clear that the one thing that we needed to do is reach out to the public. And we're really trying to do that in a multitude of ways because we want to make sure that whatever the views are of the public, that we at least understand what type of needs and interests there are. So this is probably the least fascinating part of the presentation, but what are current regulations now? And mind you, this is a snapshot of what we're doing, but the current regulations that are before City Council identify solar energy as an accessory structure. That's just where in the code it's placed as an accessory structure. The 2 primary categories that we have distinguished is ground-mounted energy and roof-mounted energy. And to be quite frank with you, most of our requests have been roof-mounted. We've only had a singular request for ground-mounted. So a lot of our discussion will focus on roof-mounted. As in any type of code language, we have a purpose statement that helps us articulate what our objectives are with the code language. And again, it's to balance the needs of what the community is interested in terms of installing solar energy and maintaining high quality and aesthetics. These are just some highlights. Some of the language, it identifies the need or the requirement to conceal any type of wiring or any type of infrastructure that's associated with equipment. It's also to, how do I explain this? Any type of building material that functions in the way that it captures solar energy. I'm going to make an example, a window. If it's installed as a window, but it functions to capture energy, we review that as a window. So there's no additional requirements for that, if that makes sense. We do have a provision that the equipment's in working order. Again, it's like any type of mechanical device, there's going to be issues associated with maintaining it, and we wanted to make sure that that is well maintained. And again, another part of this is we're going to continue to update our code as advancements take place, because we do know that this is a very fast moving industry and we want to be mindful of those advancements. In terms of ground mounted equipment, and this is currently as the code reads today, we the city of Dublin would allow them to be located to the side and the rear of a building. City Council has expressed the interest to only have ground mounted in non-residential districts. So that means commercial or industrial districts, and that they're accessory uses only. And that means it's not a primary use. It's not a solar farm. That's currently as the language reads today. In terms of roof mounted equipment, and again, this is the primary request that we have, again, located to the side or rear of a building, that it's much of the language is to ensure that the equipment is integrated into the roof so that it's seamless in its appearance. And there's some requirements for roof pitches, because that's going to dictate where the equipment can be placed and how it looks. So approval processes for the code modification, this is just where we've been and where we're going, so we understand the process. Again, this was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission in the fall. It was presented to City Council for the first reading in November. We're currently here. With the input that we gather tonight, we're going to report back to City Council in a week, slightly less, on the 17th. And that's specifically what we're hearing, not only from this meeting, but we have an online survey that we're currently capturing comments, reporting back to City Council about what we're hearing. And at this point, we are prepared to go to City Council in February. February 13th is going to be the second reading. And the reason why we're highlighting that is we want to capture input now before that second reading happens. And again, this is a tentative date for second reading, but that would be a conclusion to the code modification. So opportunities for engagement, we talked about the various boards and commissions that those are all public meetings. The public's invited, they're published, and those have been opportunities for public comment, either in person or if people would have liked to have sent information in online, that's available as well. We did the survey for the HOAs in the fall. Currently, we have on our website a particular page that's dedicated to this topic, and it's an ongoing survey. There's about 15, 16 questions. Everyone's invited to partake in the survey. We also sent postcards to every property owner in the city of Dublin, which was, again, our communication team. That was no small effort. But again, inviting people to take the survey. We currently have it active, so you're welcome to take the survey with the link that we've provided. That survey will remain open until, tentatively right now, we have it open until the 22nd of January, so a couple more weeks. And again, we'll report back what we're hearing through that survey to City Council. I think I've covered most of this. I don't want to be too redundant. The survey itself, it's a broad spectrum of questions, but these are just a few questions that we have asked the public. Generally speaking, what's your attitude towards solar? Positive, negative, there's a myriad in between. But how do you feel about solar energy? I feel that this is an important question. Have you considered solar energy? And if so, what factors impact your decision to install solar energy, whether it's financial, whether it's regulatory, whether it's anything else. In terms of commercial areas, commercial or industrial, I should be more specific. What are your thoughts? Is that acceptable? Is it not acceptable? And generally speaking, what would you like to see in terms of regulation? So just trying to capture a broad spectrum of what people are thinking for solar energy. So this is where we're going to do the Mentimeter. So this is really fun. So you don't have to hear me talk through this entire presentation. We're gonna do a survey. And so if you guys have your phones, this is Mentimeter. Have anyone used this before? It's super fun. So we ask questions, and when you enter your responses to the questions, it will give us your results in live time. So we can see what everybody in the room is thinking, and we can talk about it. So if you go to, are any of you on the website right now? Yep. Hands? Yep. It's called Menti, MENTI. Yep. And there's a code. And I'm going to say this code twice. Ready? Okay. 81319474. And it's on the screen. Let me say it again. There you go. 81319474. What's that?
If you go just to the menti.com, it should not ask you to do that. If you go to Mentimeter, then it does. Menti.com. So don't do the meter part. Yeah. Yes, if you scan the code, yeah, we had some codes out there. If you scanned that, that works too. So sure. 81319474. You're all making me hungry for ice cream right now.
How are we doing? Yep, that's going to be your first question. We're just trying to see if it works. So the first question, of course, this is not related to anything we're going to report back to council, but what is your favorite ice cream? Oh, sorry. Yes. So the more responses, apparently chocolate's in the running, the larger the font is. So it's telling us what the most preferred flavor is. I think vanilla might be, which is odd, might be a second runner. Oh, sorry. No judgment. This is a judgment-free zone. I'm sorry. I'm very picky about my ice cream, so. So do we want to go to the second question? Okay, so now we're really going to get into the heart of the matter. The first question that we are asking is, what is your attitude towards solar energy? So I'm just going to take an educated guess and say very positive is in the running. Yeah. So at least in this survey question, 32 have extended a very positive response, 11 positive, again, good, 4 neutral, and a negative. So we'll continue on to the second question. Specifically, what is your attitude towards solar energy, specifically in Dublin, if that would change your viewpoint in any way, shape, or form? You guys are doing good, getting quicker. Again, slightly, much elevated towards very positive, 11 positive, 3 neutral. Give it another minute. No. Yeah, we'll just go on. The next question, what is your attitude towards solar energy, specifically in residential communities, if that impacts your decision-making processes differently? So if in any type of residential district, what's your viewpoint? And I should say these pictures are not specific to Dublin, so that's been brought up in a couple meetings. So again, heavily weighed towards very positive. We have 31. Is that 31? We do have 8 positive, and it looks like 6 go to the other end of the spectrum for negative, and 6 neutral. Little variation on that one. We actually threw this in not only in the city of Dublin, but if you've traveled, if you live in other communities, have you seen good examples, or at least in your interpretation, good examples of solar installation? Do you like if you think that it's a good example of aesthetically and functionally, does it meet what you would think is a good application for solar energy? Sorry. Nice. Heavily towards yes, 42, and 8 for no. I think we have one more question. Ugh. Sorry, I cannot see worth anything. So again, we want to know what is impacting property owners in their decision-making processes to do solar energy. So what factors would prevent you from installing solar on your homes? Mhm. Oh, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I guess that nothing prevents you if it's already on your house, you're in good shape. Okay, so let's see what kind of responses we're getting. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good point. And again, the survey's online, so I don't know if we can tweak that survey, but if there's anything that you don't think captures either in this survey or the survey that we have online, my business card is out front. You can contact me directly if there's something that we're not capturing. I'm happy to facilitate those conversations. So it looks like financial incentives is a big part of installation, not having good location, and appearance, and 10 other. So kind of a wide spectrum of issues. But again, if we're not capturing what your issues or your challenges are for solar energy, I can be your contact person and we can make sure we take those into consideration. So same question, only in commercial applications. How do you feel? And I should specify commercial and industrial applications. What's your viewpoints on installation in those areas? So somewhat the same pattern, mostly in the positive, either very positive or positive, and there's some neutrals. So thank you. It's very helpful. So just a general open-ended question, what would you like to share with the city? What comments do you have? What challenges do you have? Is there education that we could provide to the public? Just any opportunity for us to reach out to you and help in any way. I don't know how this actually works. So the comments actually pop up. Okay. Don't restrict on street facing facades. And I won't read all these, but it's good. The reason why we do these survey questions and we get responses is so that you can see what the sentiment is amongst the community, and see what type of ideas that people have. Education, allowing solar on roof surfaces, ensuring understanding about financial costs, HOA considerations and plan districts. I'll just continue to read these as they come up. Faster permitting, that's a good one. Do something on NPR, very nice. Education seems to be a strong component. Front facades of houses, I will tell you that's been a topic of considerable dialogue with all of our boards and commissions. That's something that we've I guess, wrestled with, if you will. So any type of comments that you have about that would be extremely helpful. New housing and apartments that have options to install solar. Help owners with tax incentives. That's a great point. The federal government has some incentives. They were originally implemented last year and they've been extended into 2023. So helping you navigate those processes. No solar panels visible from the street and neighborhoods, holding homeowners accountable for maintaining them. Don't like restrictions on ground installations. Okay. Seems like front facing seems to have gotten considerable attention. Ensuring homeowners understand the long-term costs. That's a great point. This is a recoup type of process. You make a financial commitment to install them, and then benefits supersede or extend beyond that. So generally speaking, the idea is that, again, that you hear what type of comments that are being reflected in your community, that we hear that there's different types of comments, and most importantly, that those comments get back to City Council. We will be stewards of this information and ensure that that takes place. And again, the fundamental purpose is to ensure that when we do review regulations, that it incorporates these comments and addresses as much as possible in the final adoptions of regulations. So thank you. Thank you very much. And again, that was the fun part of the evening. So the survey that we have available now, it's been up for, I believe, a week and a half, roughly. Our communication team was kind enough to give us some results. And so we have gotten really great responses in terms of numbers. So again, postcards were mailed to all property owners within the city of Dublin. That was no small feat. And with a week and a half, we've gotten a little over 600 responses, which is really good this time of year. That's a really good response rate. And we just wanted to capture, now this is just a date and time that we've gotten responses back, but we wanted to let you know what we're hearing currently. So keep in mind, I think it's like 619 is the exact number. In terms of attitude towards solar energy, a majority is supporting solar energy. The exact number is in the blue category, 372. So strong support for solar energy, which is good to know. I knew I wasn't going to be able to read this.
Here we go. Is this working? Okay. So this one is, where would solar be appropriate on a residential property? So the one with the largest, the yellow bar, support 309, supporting anywhere on the roof. Then the next largest one in the pink, where would solar be appropriate? Not visible from the front of your property. Then 165, which is that darker blue color, permitted everywhere. So those three being the top response rates for that. Then other not permitted anywhere, and then anywhere on the ground. The yellow is permitted anywhere on the roof, and the also
the dark blue
is permitted everywhere, meaning you could have it on the ground or the roof. You could have it everywhere. Then this one is, does the height, color, size, style of equipment on a residential property matter to you? And green is yes. So that had 286. So we're kind of split in the middle here. So yeah, the green being yes, the yellow being no, and then if yes, that's the purple. If yes, then what is your preference in terms of where you would like to see that? So again, this, I think Tammy made this point earlier, is the aesthetic component of this and how that plays out has been something we've definitely heard compelling discussion points on both sides of that. And then this is the same question about aesthetics, but for commercial properties. So people seem to have less concerns marginally than having concerns about the aesthetics of solar on commercial properties. So with that, I think that ends our presentation piece of that, but definitely want to get your comments if you want to make any about either your answers to your questions or just, do you have questions for us that we can definitely try to answer? And as Tammy said, we can definitely follow up afterwards if we don't have the answer to something, because while we have researched this, I'm sure there's going to be something that we don't know the answer to, but want to be a resource to you for that. If you don't feel comfortable raising your hand, we have comment cards as well, so you can leave us written comments if there's something we didn't cover that you don't want to ask in a big group, because that can be kind of intimidating. But otherwise, yeah, we'll take questions here, and then I know we maybe have some virtual questions. We'll get to those. We'll let you guys go first, and then we'll do that.
And before we do this, once the question's asked, I'm going to repeat it so everyone hears, and I'll give you the microphone. The one thing that we would ask is if you would be so kind to allow one person to speak at a time, just to be respectful of everyone's time, and just to make sure that I hear what's being said. So,
what is the significance of the second reading?
So the second reading is the conclusion of what the code means. So that would be the adoption of code. So right now, nothing has been adopted. It's been introduced to council. The second reading would be when there's an actual, correct, actual vote. So let me repeat that. He's asking, what is the significance of a second reading? I'm sorry, I don't mean to use jargon. I try to not do that. The second reading, and again, this will happen in February, is when council makes, and this is the track that we're on right now. This could, based on our comments that we're getting either from the survey or tonight's meeting, that could change, but right now it's slated for February 13th. And what that means is council would make a final recommendation on the current language that we have in place. So thank you. That was a good question.
So, and to further make that point, that becomes then the law. So that would then change the rules until we would revise that and go through a public review process.
So the question is, where can we see the code? That's available online. And of course, if you don't want to go to that extent, you can contact me and I'll be glad to give you the code language. I briefly discussed what it looks like or how we're organizing it, and I'm happy to answer any questions about what we're proposing at this point. I saw, yes.
If the feedback that you get from the meeting tonight and the survey shows significant preference to allow street-facing panels,
Mhm.
how does the city incorporate that into their discussion? You take the survey, say it's 90% full. I realize it's not.
Mhm.
Does the board still get to decide? We don't. It's nice to know, but
Mhm.
we're still going with what we.
Right. So I'm going to paraphrase this. So make sure that I've captured what you're saying. The question is, given the input that's either through the survey, through any type of public meetings that we have, including tonight, how does that impact the final decision? Correct? So City Council is the final recommending body for any type of legislation, including the legislation that we're speaking. And they do make the final decision, and this would be incorporated into those decision-making capabilities. So that's why we're here, to educate or to provide that information so that they can make a decision based on those comments or with consideration of those comments. Does that help? I don't want to be too. Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So either a follow-up question or another question is, where do HOAs fall into this category? Is that correct? So to be very clear, what we're talking about tonight is the City of Dublin and what the City of Dublin will regulate in terms of zoning regulation, deed restrictions, which is your HOA restrictions, if you have them. It doesn't supersede, but it is another layer of restrictions that's applied to your property. Those are enforceable. If you have them, they are enforceable. Now, they're not enforceable through the City of Dublin. They're enforceable through your HOA. So it's actually a civil proceeding, but they are enforceable. So that's why we wanted to educate the public about what your HOAs say so that you can have that information for yourselves. If you have questions, reach out to your HOAs, or we can help you contact your HOAs and get that information for you. Yes. 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 Mm-hmm. Yes. So it is an interesting question. Thank you. Yes. Yes. So the question is, right, 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 right. Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to paraphrase again. So how are condo associations different? And I'm going to allow my lovely law director to take that conversation.
Hi there. I'm Jennifer Radler. I'm the law director for the City of Dublin. And as Tammy has so eloquently described, the city doesn't have any control over your homeowner association or your condominium association. So condominium associations are the same concept as an HOA. You have deed restrictions on your property that the condominium regulates. There's usually greater detail because there are more common expenses with a condominium association versus an HOA. But basically, the setup is the same. You're going to have private deed restrictions. And so, again, we can help you if you know, don't know who to contact for the condo, or you don't know where to find the deed restrictions. We can certainly reach out and help you, but it's the same concept as the HOA.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good question, though. That was a really good question. Yes. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. That's that's an excellent. Yes. Yes. That's a very good point. So again, paraphrasing, make sure I'm capturing what you're saying. The comment is, generally speaking, it's not a one size all fits model, right? So there's different size of properties, there's different locations of property, there's different elements that should factor into the installation of solar. And are we making those considerations based on those different types of property? Is that somewhat accurate? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So no, that's a very good point. So the answer to your question, especially with residential, I would say that that's fair. We are trying to put a lateral type of regulations in place, and your point's well made. That doesn't mean we shouldn't consider something different. For commercial applications, I would say we're treating them slightly different in the sense that we're giving a percentage of coverage, if you will. So a percentage of your property could be in solar, but your point's well made. Honestly, some of the applications that we have before the Board of Zoning Appeals is based on this conversation of my properties, for whatever shape or size or whatever reason, I'm different than most of the city of Dublin. So we do have applications that are talking about those differences. So that's a very good point. Thank you.
Much like yourself, you recently looked at.
Mhm.
I sort of assumed that. Fortunately for us, we face due east
Mm.
and discovered with the latitude that's in Dublin, Ohio, that's like would be more south or some combination.
Mm-hmm.
So amazingly, the two folks we had came in kind of evaluated the situation.
Mhm.
Suggested we don't. Very interesting experience working with somebody.
Right.
So the process of what it would take, I really need some penalties. Just
Okay. Right.
And
Okay.
we'll talk about it.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting that we heard that from two different vendors.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no single family home.
That's good. Yeah.
It might need to be taken into consideration because potentially we'll allow a lot of folks to participate by whatever direction.
Right. Right. So this isn't necessarily in the form of a question, but but a good point. Are we taking into consideration the orientation of buildings, specifically east, west orientations? Very good point. Again, this is capturing some of the difficult conversations that we're trying to have. Is there's so many elements to consider. How do we do this? So that's why we're talking. We have talked to property owners that have reached out to companies, and for a myriad of reasons, the companies basically are not installing them because it's not financially to the property owner's advantage. So there are times where they just simply have not. That's, yeah, yes, yes. And some of the cases that we've had before the Board of Zoning Appeals have made those arguments of, to make this even a viable option for us, it needs to be whatever X, Y, and Z. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so that's why we're having these conversations. So the question is, what are the considerations for properties that face south? Again, I don't want to harp on this again, but there's applications before the Board of Zoning Appeals for exactly this reason. But that's why we're having these conversations is that a need, and how does that need factor into the city of Dublin? So. Mhm. Mhm. Right. Right. Yep. Yeah, so right now, again, we're in the midst of this process, so there is no conclusion to this conversation. That's why we're yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, enough. And again, that's why these conversations are in place. And if we hear from property owners that the only opportunity for solar is for south facing, that's an I guess a point. Okay. Well, if you need help, I can help you with. But again, that's why we're talking tonight. That's exactly why we're here. Yes. Oh, sure.
I'm not very loud. So this isn't a question at all. This is a comment. I've lived in Dublin for 30 years. I've got 2 homes that I own in Dublin, 2 residential properties. The only way it could be financially viable for solar panels is if it were street facing. And so therefore, I cannot install solar panels in the city of Dublin. And it doesn't look like that's changing at all with this change that's going in, right? So that's all I want to say, I guess.
So to be clear, the draft language that we have in place is to allow for the side or rear. And if it's to the forefront of a property, that it has to be a building material, that it has to function as a building material. So again, that's why we're here. That's what we want to know. And this has been a crux of most of our conversations. So that's good to know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so again, most of the other communities, I would say they're either all or restrictive, basically. I can tell you off the top of my head, I know that Upper Arlington and Worthington, and again, this is just from my memory, those are the 2 communities that permit it everywhere. So it's a myriad of regulations. So that's exactly why we reached out to see what other people are doing, to be quite frank with you.
Can we go to some online questions real quick, and then we can come back to get the rest of you?
We'll be right with you.
Thanks, Jenny. So we have a couple of questions about the building materials. I noticed that building materials as solar are special case. GAF solar shingles are installed as roofing shingles. Would those be allowed on the front of a home? And then a similar question we have, someone asked, would voltaic shingles be a dual use item that would not have any restrictions?
I'm going to try to answer that as best I can, and we may have to follow up on that question. So if it's a shingle, if it's an actual shingle, they would be permitted to be to the front because they're functioning as a building material and an energy consumption equipment. The actual manufacturers, I would feel more comfortable if we looked into that, but yes, that's the idea. Feel like I'm being quizzed. This is challenging. If you could just give us 1 second, do you have more comments or?
One person commented that they are confused. They said you presented the current code, but didn't hear any specifics on the proposed code. So I don't know if you want to reiterate some of the proposed code language for those listening online.
Okay. So the proposed code, actually the slides that we introduced is capturing what we're proposing to council, and essentially the current language, again, it differentiates between ground mounted and roof mounted equipment. So those are the two categories. In both instances, you can install either to the side or the rear. Ground mounted equipment is only permissible, at least as in the draft that we have currently, in commercial or industrial applications. And any material that functions as a building material and an energy consumption device is treated as whatever that element is. So again, my example was a window. If you install a window that has capabilities of securing energy, we review it as a window. That's just an example. So hold on for just 1 second. No, okay, all right. But I feel compelled to, this gentleman was. Okay, thank you. So the city of Bexley, that they had regulations and it sounds like, okay. Okay. They still have a glossy. Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, so what the conversation is solar shingles. We actually researched even if they're available in this area, just because of our climate and installation costs. I do know of one company that offers them, and they explicitly only offer them. I think it was Newman's Roofing. But we did research that, and there is a higher cost to that. Okay. That's true. No, and we appreciate it. Again, this is again a judgment-free zone, but the sentiment is that the city of Dublin's worked hard for their aesthetic qualities, and that there's aspirations for continuing that. So I appreciate you being able to communicate that. Was there? Hold on for just 1 second. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. So I'm going to fill in a couple blanks, so please make sure that I'm capturing what you're saying. The question is, would we consider, I'll throw the term, it's a variance application. Would the variance application be supported if it's, I assume you're talking about to the front of a residential property, is that true? Okay, okay. So thank you. So anything that doesn't meet our current, well, anything that, and this is a blanket statement, anything that doesn't meet our code is applicable for a variance process. And there's very strict criteria that we have for variances. I don't want to get too much into it, but it requires that there's something unique about the property that would differentiate it from other properties. So there is a process. That process, again, there's several applications related to solar currently before the Board of Zoning Appeals. I actually assist that board. So there is a process. It's very specific to the requirements of the property. So I can't just say blanketly whether it be approved or not. If it meets the criteria, the board approves. If it doesn't meet the criteria, they disapprove. So, yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 So again, paraphrasing, how does deed restrictions impact property owners if they're wanting to install solar shingles and it sounds like doesn't meet their deed restrictions? Is that correct? For color. Let's just say any reason but color is your example. So again, deed restrictions are enforceable regardless of what city council does. Deed restrictions are enforceable. They're not enforceable by the city, but they're enforceable by your community. So that would be basically the superseding regulation. Does that make sense? So it's enforceable, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah, so the question is, if you're doing solar shingles, does it mean that you do the entire roof? And how do we feel about it? Right, right, right. So there is, I don't want to get too technical, but there's no one size fits all for all property owners. So these companies are coming in and they're evaluating properties on an individual basis. What's going to work for your property versus other properties? So let's just say it's probably likely that shingles, solar shingles wouldn't be required over the entirety of the roof. We do have language in the current code that says that it has to be integrated into the roof so that it blends as seamlessly as possible. So that's the stance we're taking, is trying to create that image. That's not a yes or no, but it is the intent of the regulation, is to make sure that it looks seamless, that it looks like it was part of the design of the building. I want to make sure I get everybody. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Tax incentives.
Mhm.
Newman did not give me a quote, but the rough estimate was $180,000 to $200,000. So we didn't talk anything.
Okay. Okay. Thank you and no thank you. So the
At least in Ohio right now, I think they're
yeah. All right.
And the second thing is the code. So we talked a lot about what the code doesn't allow, but we haven't said why. Because we're not set up stuff. So my assumption is that since there's somebody writing the code thinks that they're not attractive. Is that a fair statement? And we heard from one resident that
Well,
it's kind of like, it looks fine. It looks like progress. It looks like clean energy.
right, right.
It has green shingles on a 12-12-inch roof. I think it looks far more attractive than that. So,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So you've just described our planning profession in like 3-4 sentences. So the question is, how do these regulations get implemented and why, essentially why? And it's a challenging conversation. This is not an easy thing to do. It is, I have a private property. What can I do with my property versus how does that impact the community? So it's a delicate balance. I won't say that I'm writing the code. We're writing the code based on the feedback that we're getting. So it's never meant to be a singular point of view. And again, that's why we're talking. You know, does this reflect what most residents want or most property owners want? Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be a change in the way that they review solar specifically? Because you mentioned there have been people
Mhm.
that was one of them first
Mm-hmm.
and having a south-facing house.
Yep.
Not
Mm-hmm.
or you're denied.
Yeah.
So is there going to be, is there any thought into solar being thought slightly differently because of that aspect?
Right.
If no, what would be done? What could be done? Otherwise, essentially,
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, there are applications before the Board of Zoning Appeals, and are we going to change that criteria or at least look at that criteria differently for solar? I'm going to put my legal hat on. So Jennifer, if I'm not saying this correctly, please. The criteria that we have for variances, that's a statutory language. Those aren't criteria that we create. They're statutory. So they don't differentiate between solar versus another topic. Having said that, that's what the board is there to do. It's to review those criteria and evaluate whether they meet or don't meet. Those criteria don't change. They are evaluated based on the request. I won't say that the type of request doesn't weigh into that conversation, but the criteria doesn't change. That's what the board gets to decide. Yep.
Kind of on the last two notes, in terms of like how you guys decide
Mm-hmm.
whether or not to allow, you take into account home value increase in that conversation. I know there's a lot of studies out there.
Right.
Increase your
Mm-hmm.
never.
Right. So the question is, do we consider property values essentially? Just to put it in a very simple term. That's a very difficult conversation because again, almost anything can be evaluated versus increase versus decrease. So I won't say that it's not a consideration, but it's a very, it makes the conversation a little tricky, to be honest with you. We have had applicants provide documentation and studies that have shown that it increases value. Those are all presented to all of our boards. So we have found, I should say, we've been presented with information that would conclude that.
A comment more than a question.
Okay.
About
We take comments, so you're good. You're okay. Okay. Yes.
Thinking about the strategic framework the city of Dublin adopted
Yeah.
in the summer of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And the most sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first word in that language.
Mm-hmm.
Sustainable.
Right.
I would hope that the code that is adopted stays true to that.
Sure.
Allowing homeowners the opportunity, if their home is facing in a direction that requires
Mm-hmm.
panels on.
Mm-hmm.
I hope the language in the code allows for that. In order to adhere to this framework.
Sure.
Vision the city has for Dublin.
Yep.
City council has for Dublin. I also would hope that not only that the language be clear in allowing that. This one.
I would love to help you. So.
Just that it holds true to what the city has. That we find a way to balance the aesthetics. There has to be.
Sure.
Show tonight.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
Maybe it's a matter of more visual
Mhm.
for our community to see what this might.
That's
Are there pictures from other communities that
right.
have housing all next to each other?
Yep. No, that's a very good point. Right. So generally speaking, the comment is that sustainability is a very concerted effort by the city of Dublin, and we do have a sustainability framework plan in place that's actually being updated as we speak. And if you remember the purpose statement, we've actually referenced back to those principles. So I appreciate you saying that. The secondary part is illustrations. What do these look like, right? And what can look good to me might not look good to you, and vice versa. When we first started this process with the Planning and Zoning Commission, we actually did a visual preference survey, if you've ever went through that process. So it's, you know, it's like going to the eye doctor, right? Does one look good or two look good? Does two look good or three look good? So we basically presented not just local examples, but examples that we found across the country of what we are envisioning for different types of solar to gauge where their preferences lie. Because again, there's no one size fits all. Everybody has a different perspective. So we have done that, and that's a very good point. And those, as part of our presentation to City Council, it was a it was a request by City Council to graphically see illustrations within the city of Dublin that we could do without impacting private property rights, right? We can't just go touring other people's properties, but that was part of their request, is that we give them visual representations of what's in Dublin. So it's a very good point, and I'm sure that'll weigh into the discussion. Mhm. Yeah, no, the point. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Right. So just to consolidate that comment, it's about how technology is advancing and how other parts of the country treat solar. And ironically, some of our staff went on a trip to Germany and came back with visual representations of, quite frankly, in my humble opinion, solar in multiple parts of their community. It's integrated into their community. So it is treated differently throughout the country, or the world, I should say. So thank you for that.
I'd like to make a comment really closely connected to what you just said about
Mhm.
integrating into the community. At one point, we didn't have sidewalks, right? And if you go back far enough, everything that we have now. And when you first come to me and say, hey, I want to put this slab of concrete down,
Mhm.
your house,
Right.
say, no way, right?
Mhm.
But eventually, it becomes part of the character of the community.
Right.
It's integrated.
Right.
So the aesthetics are really different, right? That's what people are responding. That looks different than everything else, and so it looks odd.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
you got to get past that
Mhm.
and not let the fact that it looks a little different now stop us from doing something that's certainly better for the environment,
Right.
you know, better thing.
So I mean, I want to be very mindful of the time. This is live stream, so we do have a certain amount of time dedicated to this topic. But to conclude, your conversation is, like everything else, there's always a new thing, right? And as that new thing gets introduced to a community, there's mixed reactions and sometimes negative reactions. So that could very well be what we're experiencing. So thank you for that comment. What I will say is I can't possibly get all of your questions. So what I will do is, my business cards are out front. My name's Tammy Noble. If you call the city, I'm pretty sure I'm the only Tammy. So you'll get to me one way, shape, or form. But if you take my business card, I would love to answer your questions. If you have neighbors, whomever, if other people that aren't perhaps able to attend tonight. If we can help, I'm glad to do that. If it's something that I may not be able to answer, I'll make sure it gets to the right person. But most importantly, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to come and spend an hour and a half with the city. So we appreciate it. And yes, there are comment cards. Please fill out comment cards. If you don't want to do it right now, fill them out. I'll take them. Yep. So thank you. I don't know if Jenny, if you want to say anything. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.